The massive alien ship hung in space like a silver cathedral, its smooth curves reflecting Earth's blue light. Inside the diplomatic chamber, Ambassador Keithvar adjusted his flowing robes nervously. He had done this dance 1,000 times before. First contact with primitive species who barely understood fire, let alone faster than light travel. But something felt different this time. The humans were coming aboard. Dr. Minho Kim stepped through the airlock first, his black hair neatly combed and his lab coat pristine. Behind him walked General Daeho Park, wearing a simple military uniform, without flashy decorations. They moved with a quiet confidence that made the assembled alien diplomats shift uncomfortably in their seats. Keithvar had met representatives from over 300 species during his career. The peaceful Zalani with their flower-like faces, the wise quantum beings who spoke in mathematical equations, the gentle harbingers who communicated through color changes in their skin. All of them had one thing in common: they radiated an aura of civilization, of having moved beyond their primitive past. These humans were different. They walked like predators, not aggressive or threatening, but with the fluid grace of creatures who knew exactly how dangerous they could be. Their eyes swept the room constantly, cataloging exits, potential weapons, defensive positions. It was unconscious behavior, like breathing. "Welcome aboard the Harmony's Edge," Keithvar said, his translator converting the words to perfect Korean. "We are honored to make contact with your species." Minho smiled, and somehow that expression made every alien in the room tense up. There was nothing cruel about it, just the flash of very white, very sharp teeth. "The honor is ours, Ambassador," Minho replied, "though I should mention that our protocols required General Park's presence for any potential complications." The casual mention of military protocols during what should have been a peaceful diplomatic meeting sent ripples of unease through the delegation. The Confederation had rules about these things. First contact was always handled by scientists. Philosophers and diplomats, soldiers stayed home. "Complications?" asked Dr. Yixtal, the Confederation's chief xenobiologist. Her tentacles twitched nervously. What sort of complications could arise from a simple cultural exchange? General Park stepped forward slightly. He was shorter than most humans, but something about his presence made the spacious chamber feel smaller. "Experience has taught us to prepare for unexpected situations," he said quietly. "We've learned that peaceful intentions don't always guarantee peaceful outcomes." The aliens exchanged glances. What kind of species needed military escorts for diplomatic meetings? As the formal ceremonies began, the humans displayed perfect courtesy. They answered questions about Earth's geography, its diverse ecosystems, and the basics of human civilization. But their responses revealed troubling details. "How many nations exist on your world?" Keithvar asked, expecting the usual answer of 1 or 2 unified governments. "Currently 195 sovereign nations," Minho replied matter-of-factly, "though the number changes depending on ongoing territorial disputes." The alien diplomats blinked in confusion. Territorial disputes? Most species achieved global unity before developing space travel. It was considered a basic requirement for joining galactic civilization. And these nations, they coexist peacefully? Dr. Yixtal asked hopefully. Daeho cleared his throat. "We've had relative peace for about 70 years. Before that, we had 2 major global conflicts within 30 years of each other. The second one ended when we developed nuclear weapons. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees, nuclear weapons during their first major wars. Most species didn't develop such destructive capabilities until they'd already achieved interstellar travel and had centuries of peaceful cooperation behind them." "How many of these nuclear weapons do you currently possess?" Keithvar asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. "Approximately 13,000, Minho said casually, as if discussing the weather, though we've reduced the number significantly from our peak of 70,000. Several alien delegates made choking sounds. The most militant species in the Confederation maintained maybe a dozen nuclear devices for asteroid mining. These humans had built enough to destroy their planet multiple times over. As the meeting progressed, more disturbing details emerged. Humans had developed 16 different ways to kill each other before they invented the wheel. They turned conflict into entertainment, watching simulated battles for fun. Their children played games that would give adult aliens nightmares. But perhaps most unsettling was their complete lack of shame about any of it. When Dr. Yixtal expressed horror at humanity's violent history, Minho simply shrugged. Every species faces challenges, he said. Violence happened to be one of ours. But it also taught us valuable lessons about survival, adaptation, and the importance of being prepared. The humans spoke about warfare the way other species discussed gardening, as a natural part of life that required skill, planning, and constant attention. They analyzed their own violent tendencies with scientific detachment, treating destruction as just another tool in their survival kit. As the formal session ended, Kethvar found himself deeply troubled. These weren't the usual primitive species stumbling toward civilization. These were something else entirely, beings who had weaponized their own evolution and somehow managed to build a functioning society on top of it. The humans departed with polite bows and promises of future cooperation, leaving behind an alien delegation that would spend the next several hours in emergency session trying to figure out what they had just encountered. Dr. Yuna Lee sat in the pristine white laboratory aboard the alien ship, watching as blue-skinned scientists examined her blood samples under equipment that looked like crystalline flowers. She had volunteered for the biological exchange program, thinking it would be routine medical data sharing. She was wrong. "Your cellular regeneration rate is impossible," whispered Dr. Nixtal, his 4 eyes blinking in sequence as he stared at the test results. "These healing factors shouldn't exist in nature." Yuna tilted her head curiously. "What do you mean? Humans heal pretty normally, don't we?" The alien scientist's tentacles trembled as he pulled up comparison charts. "A paper cut takes most species 12 to 15 standard days to fully heal. Your tissue samples show complete regeneration in under 2 days. A broken bone that would sideline our people for months heals in your species within weeks. That doesn't seem that unusual," Yuna said, genuinely confused. "So we always figured everyone healed at roughly the same rate." Dr. Nixtal made a sound like air leaking from a balloon. He pulled up more data, his movements becoming increasingly frantic. "Your adrenaline production under stress. These levels would kill most sentient beings. The cortisol, the endorphin release, the way your pupils dilate and your reflexes accelerate, it's like your entire body transforms during dangerous situations." Yuna nodded. "We call it fight or flight response. Everyone has it." "No," the alien said firmly, "everyone does not have it. Most species freeze when threatened. Their cognitive functions shut down, their muscles lock up, and they wait for death. You become more efficient killers." The casual way he said "killers" made Yuna uncomfortable for the first time since arriving on the ship. She was starting to realize that humans might be more different than anyone had assumed. Meanwhile, in another section of the ship, the cultural exchange was revealing even more disturbing information. Colonel Jisoo Choi had been asked to present a simple overview of human military training. She thought it would be boring, just basic exercises that every soldier learned. The assembled alien observers watched in horrified silence as footage played on the main screen. Human soldiers moved through obstacle courses with fluid precision, their bodies adapting instantly to changing terrain. They practiced combat scenarios with a casualness that made the aliens physically ill. "This is standard infantry training," Jisoo explained, pointing to soldiers who were crawling under live ammunition. "Every recruit completes this program before active duty." A delegate from the Harmony species. Beings who looked like walking flowers made a strangled sound. "Those projectiles, they're real." "Of course," Jisoo replied. "Training with simulations only gets you so far. Real combat requires real pressure." The aliens watched humans practice urban warfare, learning to fight in buildings, sewers, and crowded streets. They saw combat medics, training to operate on wounded soldiers while under enemy fire. They witnessed communications specialists maintaining radio contact while explosions detonated around them. "How many of your people receive this training?" asked Ambassador Kethvar, his voice barely above a whisper. Jisoo considered the question. "Currently, about 25 million active military personnel worldwide." But most adult humans have some basic training, either from military service, civilian defense courses, or survival education. We start teaching basic first aid and emergency. Response to children around age 10. The revelation that humans taught warfare to their young sent several alien observers into what appeared to be panic attacks. But the most disturbing discovery came when Dr. Yuna Lee was asked about human stress. Responses in detail. The aliens had noticed something unusual in her brain scans, areas that lit up during combat scenarios in ways they'd never seen before. When humans face life-threatening situations, what happens to your thinking? Dr. Nixtal asked carefully. Yuna thought about it. Well, time seems to slow down, everything becomes very clear and focused. You stop feeling fear or pain and just handle the situation. We call it being in the zone. Your cognitive processing actually increases under extreme stress. Sure, that's when people perform impossible feats, lifting cars off trapped, victims running impossible distances, making split-second decisions that save lives. Extreme situations bring out the best in humans. The alien scientist stared at her in disbelief. For most species, extreme stress causes complete mental shutdown. You're telling me that mortal danger makes humans more intelligent? More focused anyway. We think clearer, move faster, react quicker. It's like the body knows it needs to be perfect to survive. Dr. Nixtal excused himself and immediately called an emergency meeting with the ship's command staff. What he had discovered changed everything they thought they knew about human biology. That evening, as the alien delegation gathered in their private chambers, the picture became terrifyingly clear. Humans weren't just another intelligent species that had developed weapons. They were living weapons themselves, biological machines optimized for violence and survival. Their redundant organs meant they could survive injuries that would kill other beings instantly. Their healing factors meant they recovered from battles that should have ended their fighting days forever. Their stress responses turned them into tactical computers when threatened. Even their social bonding mechanisms seemed designed for warfare. They formed unbreakable loyalty to their combat units and would die before abandoning their teammates. Ambassador Kethvar sat alone in his quarters, staring out at the blue planet below. For the first time in his long diplomatic career, he felt genuine fear, not of what humans might do, but of what they were. Tomorrow they would begin reviewing human history in detail. After what they'd learned about human biology, Kethvar wasn't sure his delegation could handle what they might discover about how these living weapons had used their capabilities throughout their development as a species. The humans had been perfectly polite, even helpful during all the examinations. But politeness from a predator didn't make it less dangerous. It just made it more terrifying. The dead world of Kepler 442c had been lifeless for over 3 million years, its surface scarred by ancient battles that had turned entire continents into glass. Dr. Tai-Hyun Jang stood at the edge of a massive crater, watching alien archaeologists work with tools that looked more like musical instruments than excavation equipment. "Another dead end," muttered Professor Velthara, her crystalline body reflecting the pale light of the distant star. 17 sites and nothing but ruins and radiation. Taehyun adjusted his environmental suit and checked his oxygen levels. As the only human on the archaeological expedition, he often felt like an outsider among the peaceful academic species. But something about this particular site bothered him in a way he couldn't explain. "The destruction patterns here are different," he said, kneeling beside a section of melted stone. "Look at these blast marks. They're not random, they're tactical." Someone was fighting a very organized retreat. The alien scientists gathered around him, their various appendages twitching with curiosity. Taehyun had noticed this about non-human species. They were brilliant at understanding peaceful civilizations, but they struggled to interpret evidence of warfare. "These positions," he continued, pointing to a series of defensive barriers, "they're overlapping fields of fire. Whoever built these knew exactly how to maximize casualties while minimizing their own exposure." Professor Velthara's crystalline surface darkened with confusion. But the architects were peaceful beings. All historical records indicate they were philosophers and builders, not warriors. "Maybe," Taehyun said quietly. "Or maybe they just didn't have a choice. 3 days later, the excavation team broke through into a sealed chamber deep beneath the ruins. The preservation field inside had kept everything exactly as it was millions of years ago, including technology that shouldn't have existed. Taehyun was the first to enter, his flashlight revealing walls covered in symbols that seemed to shift and change when he wasn't looking directly at them. But it was the equipment in the center of the chamber that made his blood run cold. Biological engineering stations, genetic modification chambers, DNA synthesis equipment that made Earth's most advanced laboratories look like children's toys. "What is this place?" whispered Dr. Zixara, floating beside him on gossamer wings. Taehyun moved deeper into the chamber, his training in military archaeology helping him piece together the scene. "It's a laboratory, but not for healing or enhancement." He paused, at a workstation covered in genetic templates. "This is a weapons facility." The alien scientists recoiled in horror, but Taehyun pressed forward. The translation software in his helmet was struggling with the ancient text, but certain phrases were becoming clear. Combat optimization, aggression enhancement, survival parameters. Then he found the file that changed everything. Project Genesis Warrior, he read aloud, his voice echoing in the chamber. The genetic patterns displayed on the ancient screen were complex beyond anything he'd ever seen. But one thing was unmistakably clear. They matched human DNA perfectly. "That's impossible," Professor Velthara said, her crystalline body flickering with agitation. "These records predate your species by millions of years." Taehyun continued reading, his translator working overtime to convert the ancient language. What he discovered made his hands shake inside his environmental gloves. The architects hadn't just created one species. They had created dozens, maybe hundreds. The files contained references to Prototype Series Alpha through Prototype Series Zeta, each one designed for specific combat scenarios. "Listen to this," Taehyun said, his voice barely steady. "Alpha Series, excessive aggression, poor unit cohesion, eliminated due to friendly fire incidents. Beta Series, insufficient pain tolerance, combat effectiveness, dropped 70% after minor injuries. Gamma Series, superior individual performance but unable to function in group tactics." The list went on and on, failed experiment after failed experiment, each one deemed inadequate for the architect's mysterious purpose. Then came the final entry. Omega Series, Project Genesis Warrior, optimal balance achieved, aggression levels sufficient for sustained combat without compromising unit loyalty, pain tolerance and healing factors exceed requirements, stress, responses enhance rather than diminish cognitive function. Social bonding mechanisms create unbreakable tactical units, recommend immediate full-scale production for deployment against the Devourer threat. Dr. Zixara made a sound like wind chimes. "In a hurricane. The Devourers, those are just legends, ancient stories about machine intelligences that consumed entire civilizations." "Maybe not so legendary," Taehyun muttered, pulling up more files. The architect's records painted a picture of desperate beings facing an enemy they couldn't defeat through peaceful means. So they had done something unthinkable. They had created living weapons. The human genetic template was just the beginning. The files contained detailed psychological profiles, behavioral modification protocols, and social engineering blueprints. Humans hadn't just been designed to fight. They'd been designed to want to fight, to be good at it, and to never give up. "Your aggression drives," Professor Velthara read over his shoulder, "calibrated to maintain optimal combat readiness without compromising civilization building capacity. Social cooperation enhanced through shared conflict experience. Protective. Instincts maximized for tribal unit survival." Every aspect of human behavior that had confused the galactic community suddenly made sense. Their tendency toward conflict, their fierce loyalty to their groups, their ability to function under extreme stress, it was all intentional design. But the most chilling discovery was in the final notes. The architects hadn't just created humans and disappeared. They had scattered their various prototypes across the galaxy, then systematically eliminated the failures. Entire species had been wiped out, because they weren't aggressive enough or weren't stable enough for the architect's purposes. Humans were the survivors, the final product of millions of years of biological warfare research. "There's more," Tae-hyun said, accessing another data cluster. "Look at this, ongoing evolution protocols. They built genetic triggers that would continue modifying human development over time, making each generation more effective than the last." The archaeological team stood in stunned silence as the implications sank in. Humans weren't just ancient weapons. They were weapons that had been continuously improving themselves for millions of years without realizing it. The most terrifying part was that it was working perfectly. The emergency session hall on Confederation Prime had never seen anything like this before. Representatives from 417 different species filled the massive chamber, their various forms of communication creating a symphony of clicks, whistles, color changes, and telepathic static. But for the first time in recorded history, the sound wasn't peaceful debate. It was barely controlled panic. Ambassador Kethvar stood at the central podium, his hands trembling as he activated the holographic display. The archaeological evidence from Kepler 442c floated above the assembly like a nightmare made real. Genetic templates, biological weapons schematics, and most terrifying of all, the human DNA matches. "The situation is clear," announced Supreme Coordinator Yilthex, her massive form rippling with bioluminescent distress patterns. "We have living weapons walking freely among our peaceful civilizations. The question is, what do we do about it?" The Vorthak delegation was the first to respond. Their leader, General Krixnol, rose on 6 legs that clicked against the chamber floor. "Immediate quarantine," he declared. "Isolate Earth and establish a monitoring perimeter. These humans cannot be allowed to spread their influence." Murmurs of agreement rippled through several sections of the assembly. The peaceful harmony species began glowing soft blue, their sign of deep worry. The gas-based ethereals started swirling in agitated patterns. "With respect," Kethvar interrupted, "quarantine may not be feasible. Our analysis suggests that humans have already begun modifying themselves beyond their original specifications. They're still evolving, still becoming more efficient at warfare." Dr. Nixtel, who had personally examined human biology, floated forward in his containment sphere. "The evidence is undeniable," he said, his tentacles writhing with anxiety. "Every generation shows measurable improvements in reaction time, tactical thinking, and physical resilience. They're unconsciously perfecting themselves as weapons." A new voice cut through the chamber, sharp, metallic, and filled with artificial precision. "The Synthetic Collective's representative, Unit 47, projected its consciousness into the assembly space. Recommendation? Preemptive termination protocol," it announced coldly. "Probability calculations indicate 97.3% chance of galactic destabilization if humans achieve full technological parity with Confederation species." The suggestion sent shockwaves through the assembly. The Confederation had never exterminated a sentient species. It went against everything they stood for. "Absolutely not," Kethvar said firmly. "We are not murderers. There must be another solution." But, even as he spoke, more disturbing reports were arriving from the human homeworld. Earth's response to learning about their true origins had been unexpected. Dr. So-Young Han, humanity's chief geneticist, had issued a public statement that was being broadcast across all human networks. Instead of horror or existential crisis, her tone was almost clinical curiosity. "The architect designs were impressive for their time," she had said during a press conference. "However, our analysis indicates several areas where improvements could be made. The healing factor could be enhanced by roughly 12%, and the stress response system has some inefficiencies we've identified." The casual way humans discussed improving their own combat capabilities sent terror through species that hadn't fought a war in millennia. General Daeho Park's follow-up statement was even worse. "We appreciate the historical context," he had said with a slight smile. "It explains some interesting questions we've had about human development. We'll be incorporating this information into our ongoing enhancement programs." Enhancement programs. The humans had enhancement programs. "They're not afraid," whispered Professor Velthara, her crystalline body dim with shock. They discovered they're living weapons and they're not afraid. They're excited. The moderate faction led by HFY tried to maintain order. We must consider diplomatic solutions. Humans have shown no aggressive intent toward the Confederation. They've been cooperative, even helpful. Because they don't need to be aggressive, snapped General Crixnell. A predator doesn't need to threaten its prey. It simply exists, and everything else becomes food. The debate raged for hours, but it was interrupted by an emergency transmission from the human delegation still aboard the research vessel. Dr. Minho Kim appeared on the main screen, his expression calm, but somehow more unsettling than any show of aggression would have been. "We understand your concerns," he said diplomatically. "We want to assure the Confederation that humanity has no hostile intentions toward any member species." Supreme Coordinator Yilthex leaned forward, her massive form casting shadows across the chamber. "Dr. Kim, are you aware of your species' true origins?" "We are," Minho replied simply. "It's fascinating information. We're particularly interested in the genetic modification techniques the architects used. Some of their methods are quite elegant." The casual academic interest in their own weaponization made several delegates physically ill. "What are your intentions now that you know the truth?" HFY asked carefully. Minho considered the question thoughtfully. "Well, we've always believed in continuous improvement. Now that we understand our baseline parameters, we can work more efficiently toward optimization." Optimization. The humans wanted to optimize themselves further. "Dr. Kim," the Supreme Coordinator said slowly. "What would you consider optimal?" For the first time, Minho's expression shifted slightly. Something flickered behind his eyes. Not malice, not aggression, but a cold analytical focus that made every being in the chamber suddenly aware they were talking to a predator. "Optimal would be the ability to protect what we value," he said, quietly. "Our families, our friends, our way of life. The architects designed us for war, but we've chosen to use that design for protection." The distinction seemed important to him, but it was lost on species that had never needed to make such choices. As the transmission ended, the assembly fell into uncomfortable silence. They had wanted reassurance from humanity, but instead they had received confirmation of their worst fears. Humans weren't just weapons, they were weapons with goals, intelligence, and the terrifying self-awareness to improve themselves. The vote that followed would reshape galactic politics forever. But as the delegates cast their decisions, one question haunted everyone present. How do you contain something that was specifically designed to be uncontainable? Outside the chamber, early warning systems had begun detecting something approaching. From the edge of known space, something that hadn't been seen for millions of years, the Devourers were returning. The first Devourer ships appeared at the edge of Confederation space on a Tuesday morning, their black hulls absorbing light like cosmic wounds. Admiral Heejin Yu was drinking coffee in her office aboard the human flagship Determination when the emergency alert started flooding her communications array. "Ma'am," her aide, Lieutenant Jiwon Seo, burst through the door with a tablet in his hands. "The Confederation is under attack. Unknown hostiles, massive energy signatures, and—" He paused, swallowing hard. "They're asking for our help." Hyejin set down her coffee cup carefully. After weeks of debate about humanity's place in the galaxy, the Confederation had finally made their decision. They wanted humans quarantined, monitored, contained. Now they were begging for help. "How many ships did they lose in the first engagement?" she asked calmly. "All of them, ma'am, the entire Fourth Fleet, gone in 17 minutes. Hyejin nodded and activated her command console. "Signal all human vessels, battle stations, and get me a direct line to Earth Command." Across the galaxy, the Confederation's most peaceful species were experiencing something they hadn't felt in thousands of years: absolute terror. The Devourers weren't just attacking their ships, they were consuming entire star systems, converting matter into more of themselves with terrifying efficiency. Supreme Coordinator Yilthex's emergency broadcast reached every inhabited world simultaneously. "All species are to evacuate core systems immediately. Civilian transports have absolute priority. Military vessels will provide escort protection. But the Confederation's military vessels were designed for peacekeeping, not warfare. Their weapons were calibrated for crowd control, and their shields optimized for asteroid impacts. Against an enemy that had destroyed civilizations for millions of years, they were worse than useless. They were target practice. The human response was different. Colonel Sunwoo Kim stood on the bridge of the destroyer, relentless, watching devourer machines tear through Confederation defenses like tissue paper. His tactical display showed enemy formations, movement patterns, and weapon signatures. Most importantly, it showed weaknesses. Target their manufacturing nodes first, he ordered, his voice carrying the calm authority of someone who had trained for this exact scenario his entire life. Cut off their reproduction capabilities, then eliminate processing centers. Standard extinction protocol. Lieutenant Commander Chaewon Park looked up from her weapons console. Sir, extinction protocol. Against an unknown enemy. Shouldn't we attempt communication first? Sunwoo's expression didn't change. They're machines designed to consume organic life. There's nothing to communicate about. Execute the protocol. The phrase standard extinction protocol was picked up by Confederation monitoring stations. The fact that humans had a standard protocol for completely eliminating enemy species sent new waves of horror through the already panicking alien populations. But it worked. Human fleets moved through space like surgical instruments, their tactics honed by thousands of years of warfare against their own species. They didn't engage the devourers in honorable combat. They hunted them with predatory efficiency. Flanking maneuver complete, reported Captain Dowan Choi from his position behind the devourer advance. Enemy supply lines are cut. Beginning. Systematic elimination of support units. The devourers, for the first time in millions of years, found themselves facing an enemy that thought like they did. Humans didn't waste time on diplomatic solutions or moral considerations. They identified the threat, calculated the most efficient method of elimination, and executed their plan with machine-like precision. Dr. Minho Kim, now serving as humanity's liaison to the Confederation Emergency Command, watched the battle unfold from the safety of a deep space station. The alien commanders around him were stunned into silence as human forces systematically dismantled an enemy that had destroyed their ancestors. "How are they doing this?" whispered Admiral Kethvar, his diplomatic composure finally cracking. "The devourers consumed the architects themselves. How are your people winning?" Minho considered the question carefully. The architects were peaceful. Beings forced into warfare. We're the opposite. We're weapons that learn to be peaceful. When we fight, we're not abandoning our nature. We're embracing it. The distinction was lost on most of the alien observers, but the results spoke for themselves. Within 72 hours, the devourer advance had not only been stopped but completely reversed. Human forces were pushing the machine intelligence back toward the galactic rim, destroying manufacturing facilities and resource stations with surgical precision. The final battle took place in the dead system where the devourers had established their primary base. Fleet Admiral Su Yong-han coordinated the assault from her flagship, her tactical display showing dozens of human vessels moving in perfect formation. "All units, final approach," she broadcast. "Remember, we're not just fighting for ourselves. We're fighting for every peaceful species that can't fight for themselves." The Devourer stronghold was a massive structure that had been built from the bones of dead worlds. Human forces surrounded it completely, cutting off all escape routes. Before beginning their final assault, the battle lasted 6 hours. When it was over, the Devourer threat had been completely eliminated. In the aftermath, as rescue ships moved through the debris fields and humanitarian aid flowed to devastated worlds, the galaxy found itself facing a new reality. The Confederation's peaceful species had survived, but only because humanity had done what they could not, embrace their violent nature in service of protecting others. Dr. Minho Kim stood in the observation deck of a hospital ship, watching. Human medics treat wounded aliens with the same efficiency they had shown in battle. A young Zelani child, her flower-like face pale with trauma, clung to a human nurse who was humming a gentle Earth lullaby. "We were right to fear you," Ambassador Kethvar said quietly, joining Minho at the observation window. "But we were wrong." "About why?" Minho nodded, understanding the distinction. The architects designed us to be weapons, but we chose what to aim at. The galaxy had been saved, but it had also been fundamentally changed. The peaceful species that had once pitied humanity for their violent nature now understood a terrible truth. They weren't the evolved ones who had transcended their primitive past. They had simply been lucky enough to never face a threat that required the kind of protection only humanity could provide. As Reconstruction began, and the Confederation slowly returned to normal, one thing remained clear. The Guardians were now watching at the gate, ensuring that the gentle civilizations they had sworn to protect could continue building their peaceful tomorrow. Humanity had finally found their place in the galaxy, not as conquerors, but as protectors of everything worth preserving.